Imagine, like, a deceased president issuing this devastating, civilization-ending military strike from beyond the grave.
Right, like something straight out of a movie.
Yeah, exactly. It
Right.
sounds like the plot of some crazy Cold War science fiction novel or um, maybe a discarded script from a Bourne movie or something.
Definitely.
But according to the sprawling geopolitical intelligence framework we are dissecting today, setting up a literal geopolitical dead man's switch is exactly what Donald Trump allegedly attempted to do.
Just recently, yeah.
Right, just recently.
Yeah.
So welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are taking a massive, incredibly complex geopolitical narrative today and just putting it under the microscope for you.
And it is a dense one.
Oh, it's so dense. We've got this really intense piece of source material to navigate. It's a transcript of a recent wide-ranging interview featuring Alex Jones on Mario Nawfal's show.
That's right.
And our mission today is to unpack this specific worldview. I mean, it's a narrative that starts with reports of assassination plots and then it just spirals rapidly.
Very rapid.
Yeah, into claims of, like, shadow intelligence mergers, historically unprecedented nuclear blackmail, and, a fundamental fracturing of the United States political system.
But before we take a single step further into this territory, we really need to establish a very rigid baseline for you, the listener.
Yeah, this is important.
It is, because the source material we're mapping out today, it contains highly explosive theories. I mean, controversial geopolitical claims and polarizing viewpoints that touch on, frankly, the most sensitive third rails of global politics right now.
For sure.
So our presence here is strictly analytical. I want to be really clear about that. We are not endorsing, validating, or adopting any of the political positions, left-wing, right-wing, or otherwise, that are presented in this text.
Not taking sides at all.
Not at all. Our sole objective is to impartially deconstruct the architecture of the arguments contained within this specific interview.
Right, we just want to look at the logic.
Exactly. The logic, the alleged mechanisms, and the historical precedents the speakers are using to build their case. That way, you can clearly understand the claims circulating in this alternative political discourse without us putting a spin on it.
Yeah, we are treating this transcript like a diagnostic X-ray of a very specific, very intense geopolitical worldview.
That's a good way to put it.
We're just going to put it up on the light box,
Right.
right? And see where the fractures and the anomalies are. And the scope of this particular X-ray is staggering.
It really covers everything.
It does. It attempts to draw a straight causal line from domestic American campaign rhetoric all the way to global supply chain collapse and, like, existential nuclear threats.
It's a massive leap.
Massive.
Yeah.
So let's jump right into the inciting incident, because the spark that lights this entire narrative fire in the source material is a series of intelligence reports.
Right, from the mainstream media.
Yeah, the text focuses on reporting from CNN and Axios detailing that U.S. and Israeli intelligence had detected Iranian plots to assassinate Donald Trump. But the source zeroes in on a very specific piece of nuance provided by the Axios reporter Barak Ravid.
Yeah, and the distinction Ravid makes there, which this whole interview basically hinges on, is the difference between active operational plotting and, ambient intelligence chatter.
Okay, unpack that a little bit.
Well, according to the transcript, Ravid clarified that Israeli intelligence did not hand over a detailed, actionable schematic of an Iranian hit squad moving into position.
So it wasn't like, here's the sniper's nest.
Exactly. Rather, the intelligence community picked up signals of Iranian figures merely discussing the matter.
Oh, okay.
It's the difference between intercepting a finalized blueprint for an attack versus intercepting a hypothetical conversation where adversaries are just, exploring the idea of a political figure's death.
Like, wouldn't it be convenient if this guy was gone? Rather than, here's how we're going to get him.
Right, exactly that.
But the public reaction to that chatter escalated the situation immediately. I mean, the transcript tracks Trump's reaction at the NATO summit, where he took this intelligence incredibly seriously.
Very serious.
He made public comments stating he may not be here too long.
Yeah, that was wild.
And then the narrative points to reports where Trump claimed he left explicit instructions that, should he be assassinated, the United States military is justified and pre-authorized to literally bomb Iran at levels they've never seen before.
Which is the dead man switch you mentioned.
Right. He is trying to build that geopolitical dead man switch. It's a pre-programmed promise of absolute destruction just to ensure his own safety.
Or at least that's the intent.
Yeah, but I struggle with the legal reality of this. I mean, does the United States Constitution or the chain of command actually allow a president to issue binding, hypothetical, posthumous orders to the Pentagon. Like, can you do that?
No, the constitutional mechanics make that an impossibility. And honestly, that's a critical flaw that the source material itself acknowledges.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. The military chain of command requires a living, conscious commander-in-chief. If a president is killed or incapacitated under the 25th Amendment, their prior hypothetical orders for a retaliatory strike instantly become void.
They just evaporate.
They evaporate. The nuclear football and the command authority immediately transfer to the vice president, which in this scenario would be J.D. Vance.
Right, of course.
So it would be entirely up to the newly sworn-in president to look at the situation and decide whether to initiate a retaliatory war. You just cannot legally automate a military strike from the grave.
So the dead man's switch is unplugged, the wires are cut the second the president is no longer breathing.
Exactly. And that structural reality is what makes the source's analysis of Trump's strategy so compelling here.
How so?
Well, the worldview presented here suggests that by publicly announcing this bomb them into oblivion instruction, Trump fundamentally miscalculated.
Interesting.
He intended to create an ultimate deterrent, right, like a radioactive shield. But the framework assumes he actually created a catastrophic vulnerability.
Wait, a vulnerability?
Yeah.
By threatening massive retaliation.
Yeah, because by publicly guaranteeing exactly who he would blame and exactly what the retaliatory consequence should be, he hasn't scared off his enemies.
Right.
He has inadvertently handed a perfect motive, a prepackaged narrative, and a loaded weapon to any other actor who might want him removed and wants a war with Iran.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yep.
If you broadcast to the world, like, if I die, blame the guy in the red shirt and burn his house down, you've just given everyone else in the room the perfect incentive to put on a red shirt and pull the trigger.
That's the exact logic the source is using, yes.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack this, because that logical leap brings us to the core, arguably the most explosive hypothesis in this entire transcript.
It really is.
The source argues that the actual imminent threat to Donald Trump isn't currently coming from Tehran at all.
No, the primary theory articulated by Alex Jones in this interview is that the true threat stems from hardline elements within Israeli intelligence and specific political factions, which the text refers to as Likudniks, meaning referencing the right-wing political party currently dominating Israel's ruling coalition.
Right, Likud. Okay, let's drill into the alleged motive here. Because why would a historical U.S. ally want to assassinate an American political figure who has historically been very supportive of them?
Well, the transcript constructs this psychological and political profile of the current Israeli leadership, focusing heavily on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Okay.
And the narrative describes a leadership structure operating under extreme existential desperation.
Desperation, hell.
The claim is that Netanyahu faces immediate political collapse, massive domestic unrest, and potential imprisonment on corruption charges the literal moment the current regional conflicts conclude.
So the war keeping him in power, essentially.
That's the argument. Therefore, the theory posits that a desperate faction within this leadership structure needs to drag the United States into a full-scale, direct military confrontation with Iran.
Just to keep the war going.
Yes, to indefinitely prolong the wartime environment and sustain what the source terms the Greater Israel Project.
Man, the rhetoric quoted in the text is incredibly stark. It claims top Israeli officials have stated behind closed doors that they need a new 9/11.
Yeah, that phrasing is heavy.
Very heavy. A new 9/11, meaning they need a massive, undeniable, emotionally shattering tragedy that completely bypasses domestic U.S. political division.
Right, something that unifies everyone.
Yeah, and galvanizes the American public and the military machine into unquestioning support for a war in the Middle East.
And within the logic of this interview, the assassination of Donald Trump is positioned as that catalyst.
The new 9/11.
Exactly. The theoretical plot is sequential, according to the source. Carry out the assassination, immediately plant evidence or utilize the existing intelligence chatter we talked about to blame Iran, and then leverage Trump's own recent public demands for retaliation.
The dead man's switch.
Right. The ultimate objective is to box the new administration, presumably led by J.D. Vance, into a corner where the public outcry is so immense that they have no political choice but to launch a total bombardment or ground invasion of Iran.
The transcript uses this vivid imagery, saying Trump has teed himself up like a golf ball for this exact scenario.
It's a very evocative way to put it.
But I have to challenge the foundational logic the source uses to dismiss Iran as the primary threat. I mean, if Iranian crowds are openly chanting death to America, and they have a deeply entrenched, multi-decade history of adversarial posturing, Why on earth does the source argue they are the least likely suspects to actually pull the trigger on an assassination?
Well, the source navigates that by drawing a really hard line between Iran's domestic propaganda and their actual geopolitical strategy.
So words versus actions.
Yes. The framework presented in the text argues that following an event referred to as Midnight Hammer, which appears to reference a significant but contained exchange of drone and missile strikes roughly a year prior, Iran's highest strategic priority shifted heavily.
Shifted toward what?
Toward de-escalation with the United States.
De-escalation after launching strikes. Walk me through the mechanics of that. Why does a nation chanting death to America structurally need things to calm down?
It comes down to macroeconomics and regime survival, basically.
Okay.
The transcript argues that Iran has two primary objectives right now. First, forcing U.S. military infrastructure out of their immediate sphere of influence. And second, gaining access to massive reserves of frozen international assets. The source cites a figure of $300 billion.
That is a lot of money to be locked out of.
It is. And the theory assumes the Iranian leadership is entirely rational and calculating here. They know definitively that assassinating a former U.S. president would permanently forfeit those billions.
Right, they'd never see a dime.
Never. And worse, it would invite an overwhelming existential military response that would likely topple their government entirely.
So they're playing it safe.
Right. The text claims Iran has committed strictly to proportional responses. Calculated, symmetrical actions designed to save face domestically without triggering an actual U.S. declaration of war.
So the narrative presents Iran as this completely rational actor playing a long economic game, while painting the hardline Israeli leadership as cornered, irrational actors operating out of pure political survival.
That's the dichotomy the text sets up, yes. And the psychological profile it builds for Netanyahu is particularly dark.
What do they say?
It likens him to a cornered authoritarian deep in a bunker. It suggests a leadership structure trapped in an echo chamber, isolated from reality, where the only options that seem viable are massive, reckless gambles.
The Hail Mary pass.
Exactly. The argument is that when a leader faces personal and political ruin, the extreme risk of a false flag operation becomes a mathematically acceptable roll of the dice for them.
I follow the theory, I really do, but I stumble on the execution.
How so?
Well, let's say this faction is cornered and desperate, pulling off a false flag assassination on American soil, manipulating the subsequent FBI investigation, and successfully steering the entire U.S. military apparatus into a war based on fabricated evidence.
Yeah.
That requires far more than just a motive.
Oh, absolutely.
You would need an unfathomable level of access. You can't just hack the Pentagon from the outside or trick the CIA with a fake memo. You need deep structural integration.
And that logistical hurdle is exactly what the transcript addresses next.
Really?
Yeah. The source argues that this required level of deep structural access isn't just theoretical. It claims it is currently being actively legislated into existence under the radar.
Okay, this is the part of the transcript that really caught my attention, because it dives right out of the realm of spycraft and straight into the bureaucratic weeds.
It does get very specific here.
It specifically points to something called Section 224 of the Defense Authorization Act 2027, along with an accompanying intelligence funding bill.
Right. And the claims regarding Section 224 suggest a monumental, almost unprecedented shift in how sovereign militaries operate.
What kind of shift?
The text describes a scenario where core pillars of the American defense apparatus, the U.S. military command, the CIA, and
DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, right? The people responsible for the military's most bleeding-edge experimental technology.
Exactly, the crown jewels of U.S. defense tech. The claim is that these entities are essentially being fused with the Israeli Defense Forces and the Mossad.
Fused. The vocabulary the source uses here is so intense, it doesn't describe a partnership or a, joint task force.
No, it uses terms like lifetime synchronicity, fusion, and marriage.
Marriage? I mean, it claims this integration bypasses simple intelligence sharing and goes all the way from the ground floor of research and development at engineering universities straight through to the physical deployment of weapon systems, avionics, and guidance software.
It is describing an operational blending of two entirely sovereign military-industrial complexes.
It's wild. But the transcript immediately juxtaposes this legislative push with a massive internal contradiction from within the U.S. intelligence community itself.
Yes, the DIA report.
Right. While Congress is allegedly drafting this lifetime fusion, the text claims that the Pentagon's own Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, the people whose literal job it is to assess military threats to the United States, recently released a report identifying Israel as a premier, top-tier espionage and national security threat.
A premier threat.
Yeah, the source claims that DIA cited aggressive human intelligence operations, sophisticated signal spying, and even a documented history of transferring highly classified U.S. defense technology to China.
Which is a huge red
A
flag.
massive red flag. The report allegedly uses the word unhinged to describe the sheer volume and audacity of the espionage.
Which brings up a really glaring contradiction.
Exactly. Let me use a corporate analogy to explain why this feels so completely contradictory.
Go for it.
Imagine a massive Fortune 500 tech company, okay? Their board of directors suddenly announces a total structural merger with a smaller, aggressive rival firm. They say they're going to share all patents, open all server access, and integrate their proprietary code bases. But on the exact same day, the Fortune 500 company's own internal cybersecurity department releases an audit formally declaring that this rival firm is their absolute biggest corporate espionage threat, that they are constantly trying to steal their data and sell it to foreign competitors.
Right.
Why would the board force a total merger under those conditions? How does a politician circumvent the internal firewall of their own military intelligence apparatus?
Well, according to the source, by fundamentally altering the financial and structural relationship.
How so?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the worldview presented here argues that massive foreign lobbying efforts are successfully overriding the internal classified security assessments of the Pentagon.
So lobbying beats the DIA.
That's the claim. The transcript points to allegations that Netanyahu publicly sent letters to congressional committee chairmen thanking them for inserting specific legislative language that he allegedly authored himself.
Wait, he wrote the language for the U.S. bill?
That is what the source asserts. And the objective of this fusion, according to the text, is for Israel to secure permanent co-ownership of the United States military-industrial complex.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Break down the mechanics of that co-ownership for me. Because if you are a foreign nation, how does embedding yourself in DARPA bypass the standard political hurdles?
It's all about escaping the annual appropriation cycle.
The funding fights.
Exactly. Typically, foreign military aid operates through mechanisms like foreign military financing, or FMF. A foreign ally requests aid, the U.S. president proposes a package, and it goes to Congress.
And then Congress argues about it for 6 months.
Right. Congress debates it, the public scrutinizes it gets caught up in domestic political leverage, and it can be conditioned or delayed based on human rights concerns or geopolitical shifts. It's vulnerable to the democratic process.
Which is how it's supposed to work.
Sure. However, if you shift from being a recipient of finished military aid to being a co-developer embedded in the underlying supply chain, the dynamic changes entirely.
Oh, I see.
If Israeli engineers and intelligence officers are permanently synchronized with DARPA to jointly design the avionics for the next generation of fighter jets, they aren't asking for a handout anymore.
They own a piece of the intellectual property.
Precisely. They are structurally inextricable from the American defense apparatus. You completely bypass the public congressional funding fights because to cut them off would mean severing the supply chain of the U.S. military itself.
It's a bureaucratic Trojan horse.
Yeah.
You don't need to ask for the weapons if you own the factory that builds them.
Exactly. And the transcript argues this isn't just a paper exercise happening in committee rooms in Washington. The source asserts we are already witnessing the kinetic, real-world consequences of this intertwined relationship playing out through active military strikes.
So it's moving from legislation to actual explosions.
Yes. The narrative transitions from legislative maneuvering to actual battlefield application. It details recent military strikes allegedly executed by coordinated U.S. and Israeli forces against highly specific Iranian infrastructure targets.
Right. The text highlights strikes on the auxiliary buildings surrounding the Bushehr nuclear reactor, military installations on Karg Island, and crucially, a vital Iranian railway network that snakes up through Turkmenistan and connects directly to Russia and China.
And that railway is key. The source explicitly notes this railway is a foundational node in China's massive Belt and Road Global Infrastructure Initiative.
So it's not just hitting Iran, it's poking China.
Very much so. But the selection of these specific targets is analyzed through a fascinating psychological lens applied to Donald Trump's preferred method of conflict.
Yeah, the text argues that Trump operates fundamentally differently from a traditional military hawk or, warlord. He is deeply averse to the optics of destroying civilian centers or turning cities to rubble.
Right. The transcript notes his background in real estate. He likes architecture, gold domes, pristine golf courses.
He doesn't want the television imagery of mass civilian casualties or leveled neighborhoods.
Precisely. The text claims he prefers to target what he refers to as the gold and the goodies.
Meaning the economic arteries, deep water ports, command and control data centers, and critical logistical railways.
The logic is that Trump views geopolitical conflict as an extreme, hyper-aggressive form of business negotiation.
Like a hostile takeover.
Exactly. You don't destroy the competitor's office building. You seize their bank accounts and sever their supply chains. You cripple the infrastructure that allows the adversary to generate revenue.
Thereby forcing them to the negotiating table out of economic starvation.
Right, while avoiding the international outrage of a traditional bloody ground war.
But the source issues a massive warning right here. It argues that this strategy of precisely targeting economic infrastructure is playing with global macroeconomic fire.
It outlines a terrifying domino effect.
It really does. The text claims that if these surgical strikes push Iran into a corner, their ultimate retaliatory lever is closing the Strait of Hormuz.
The most important waterway in the world.
And the transcript notes that internal Pentagon assessments concede Iran actually possesses the asymmetric capability to do it, using anti-ship missiles, mines, and swarm boats to essentially shut down the strait indefinitely.
Which would be catastrophic.
So if that happens, how exactly does that impact the listeners sitting in traffic right now? Connect the geopolitical maneuver to everyday life for us.
Well, the economic modeling cited in the text is incredibly severe. If the Strait of Hormuz is choked off, it doesn't just mean gas jumps $1 a gallon at your local station.
Which would be bad enough.
Right. But the strait is a critical choke point for a massive percentage of the world's liquefied natural gas and oil. But crucially, the transcript emphasizes the secondary effect. It halts the global supply of the petrochemicals necessary to manufacture modern agricultural fertilizer.
Fertilizer, wow.
Yes, without fertilizer, global crop yields plummet. The source cites geopolitical economic models demonstrating a harsh mathematical reality regarding societal stability.
What's the math?
Historically, when a population is forced to spend 50% of its total income strictly on basic food and energy needs, you see a massive spike in violent crime and localized instability.
60%.
But when that threshold crosses 60%, the models predict widespread revolution and systemic civil unrest.
And what happens if the models push past 65 or 70%?
Total societal anarchy.
Anarchy.
The text suggests that level of economic devastation triggers the collapse of national governments and initiates mass, desperation-driven migration floods that would make current border issues globally look entirely insignificant.
Because people move when they are starving.
Exactly.
This brings up a fantastic analogy used in the text. It compares the neoconservative hardliners driving this policy to the captain of the Titanic.
It's a very fitting comparison.
They are deliberately steering the ship of state at full throttle into a known, dense iceberg field simply to break a speed record or achieve some ideological victory. And in this analogy, the U.S. and its allies are already deep inside the iceberg field. The ship is scraping ice right now.
Yes, the damage is imminent.
So the interviewer naturally asks the question, if Trump sees the icebergs and he knows closing the strait sinks the global economy, why doesn't he just turn the ship around? Like declare a diplomatic victory, de-escalate with Iran, pull back out of the ice field, and go home.
It seems like the obvious choice.
But the text makes a chilling claim. It says Trump can't do that. He is structurally trapped. Walk me through the mechanics of that trap.
The trap is constructed by what the source refers to as shadow hardliners, deeply embedded within the United States intelligence and defense apparatus.
The deep state, essentially.
Essentially, yes. The transcript argues that if Trump were to legitimately attempt a total withdrawal from the Middle East to appease Iranian demands and avoid the economic collapse, these internal factions would forcibly remove him.
The text uses extreme blunt language here, suggesting he would be assassinated by elements within his own government almost instantly.
Yes, that is the explicit claim.
So the President of the United States would be killed by the U.S. government for trying to avoid a global depression. I mean, what is the strategic imperative that justifies that level of internal mutiny?
It all comes back to the railway we discussed earlier, China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Okay, connect those dots.
The framework assumes that these shadow hardliners operate on a grand, multi-generational geopolitical chessboard. They view maintaining American hegemony and physically blocking China's land-based expansion into the Middle East and Europe as the single paramount existential imperative of the United States.
So stopping China is more important than anything else.
To these factions, yes. They believe pulling out of the region cedes total control of global logistics to Beijing and Moscow. They calculate that allowing China to establish a contiguous, unchallengeable economic empire is actually worse than enduring a massive domestic economic depression.
Wow. So Trump is caught in a vice. Risk a catastrophic global depression by staying and fighting, or face fatal internal consequences by attempting to leave.
A literal lose-lose situation.
And the timeline for this economic ruin is startlingly fast. The text claims that just 6 months of a closed strait guarantees a severe global recession. A full 12 months equals a global depression on par with or exceeding the 1930s.
It's a very compressed timeline.
And when you have existential threats mounting on that scale.
Yeah.
I mean, global economic collapse on one side, internal mutiny on the other, and regional powers facing political extinction leaders begin to feel completely cornered.
And when state actors feel their survival is on the line, the established rules of engagement disintegrate.
Dissolves come off.
Completely. The source material looks to the past to predict how these cornered factions might behave, and it brings up a deeply unsettling historical precedent.
Yeah, this was the heaviest part of the transcript for me. It moves from conventional warfare and economic blockades straight into the concept of active nuclear blackmail.
It goes right to the nuclear option.
Right. The text anchors this concept by relaying a specific, highly controversial historical narrative from the 1973-1974 era involving President Richard Nixon, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, and the Yom Kippur War.
Let's unpack the mechanics of this historical claim.
Yeah, please.
The text alleges, referencing statements attributed to Jonathan Pollard, that Israel utilized explicit, undeniable nuclear blackmail against the highest levels of the United States government.
And what did that actually look like?
The narrative presented is that during a critical, desperate phase of the conflict, Israeli leadership contacted Washington and instructed them to immediately review their satellite intelligence of a specific Israeli military airfield.
Just look at this map.
Right, look at this specific runway.
Yeah.
The claim is that the satellite imagery revealed Israeli fighter bombers sitting on the tarmac, actively loaded with hydrogen bombs.
Hydrogen bombs, not conventional payloads.
Correct. The threat delivered to Nixon and Kissinger was stark. If the United States did not instantly lift its arms embargo and initiate a massive emergency airlift of conventional weapons and supplies, Israel was prepared to launch those bombers and drop hydrogen weapons on Cairo, Egypt.
That is an astonishing claim. It's not a vague threat of, we have weapons. It's literally, the engines are running, the bombs are loaded, give us the conventional weapons, or we initiate a nuclear holocaust in the Middle East.
Yes, they were holding the world hostage to force their allies' hand.
And the transcript doesn't just leave that as a historical artifact either. It draws a direct, continuous line from that 1974 incident to the modern era, specifically dating claims regarding the Obama and Hillary Clinton administration.
It claims the pattern repeated.
Exactly. The source alleges a repeating pattern of behavior where Israeli leadership repeatedly contacted the U.S. State Department, claiming their strike aircraft were on the runway, engines hot, ready to launch a preemptive conventional strike against Iranian nuclear facilities.
And the goal there, according to the text, was coercive diplomacy.
Forcing the U.S. into a corner.
Right, forcing the United States to either authorize the strike, join the attack militarily, or provide massive diplomatic concessions to stand them down.
The source also organically brings up a term that hovers over all of this, the Samson option.
Yes, that's a crucial piece of context here.
For the sake of understanding the text's worldview, we need to talk about what that doctrine actually entails. It's the absolute last resort deterrence strategy.
Right.
The idea that if the state of Israel feels its destruction is completely imminent and unavoidable, if the borders are breached and the nation is falling, they will not go quietly. They will use their entire nuclear arsenal to take every single adversary and potentially the broader region down into the ashes with them.
Pulling the pillars of the temple down on everyone's heads.
Exactly like the biblical story of Samson. So, if we apply this historical framework to the present crisis, is the source seriously suggesting that if this alleged false flag assassination were to happen, the immediate fallout isn't just a conventional ground war in the Middle East, but immediate, active nuclear blackmail against the United States?
That is the logical destination of the argument, and it requires us to examine perhaps the most disturbing analytical point the source makes.
What's that?
It forces us to look at the psychological and theological mindset of the hardliners allegedly steering these events.
Okay.
The framework assumes we are no longer dealing entirely with rational, secular state actors making calculated, game theory geopolitical moves. It synthesizes a terrifying picture of the current leadership across multiple opposing factions.
It describes a complete systemic breakdown of rational deterrence.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanics of mutually assured destruction, or MA.
The Cold War doctrine.
Yes. During the Cold War, MAD worked because both the US and the Soviets were rational actors who fundamentally wanted to survive. You don't launch your nuclear weapons because you know the retaliatory strike will turn your own country to glass. The fear of death preserves the peace.
That makes sense.
But the source argues that for the specific extreme factions currently wielding influence, this foundational logic is completely broken.
How so?
The text claims there are powerful Christian Zionists embedded in U.S. policy circles who possess a genuine, literal belief that initiating a nuclear conflict with Iran will serve as the catalyst to trigger the biblical end times and the second coming of Christ.
So they want the war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, it claims there are Islamic hardliners in the region who firmly believe an apocalyptic region-wide war is the necessary prerequisite to usher in the 12th Imam. And it claims there are ultra-Orthodox political factions in Israel who view a catastrophic existential war as the mechanism to force the Messiah's return.
The text calls this a feedback loop of apocalyptic thinking. You have opposing armies all holding matchsticks, standing in a room full of gasoline, and they all believe their respective holy book is instructing them to light the match.
That is the terrifying crux of the entire narrative. When you are dealing with religious hardliners who view the apocalypse not as a tragedy to be avoided, but as a divine prophecy to be fulfilled, mutually assured destruction is no longer a deterrent.
It becomes a goal.
It becomes a shared objective.
That's horrifying. Because if your ultimate goal is the end of the world so your prophecy can come true, the threat of nuclear annihilation isn't a red stop sign. It's the finish line you are actively sprinting toward.
Exactly right.
And if that is the mindset operating behind the scenes, conventional statecraft, economic sanctions, and traditional diplomacy are completely, utterly useless. I mean, you can't negotiate a trade deal with someone trying to end the world.
You really can't. And recognizing the impossibility of conventional diplomacy in this environment, the source suggests that Trump is desperately attempting a different maneuver.
The shifting chessboards.
Right. The text claims he is trying to drastically shift the geopolitical chessboard, realigning historical alliances to bypass these apocalyptic feedback loops.
But this aggressive maneuvering is triggering massive shockwaves back home, leading to profound fractures within the U.S. political system.
Very much so. Let's examine these shifting chessboards, specifically focusing on the text's analysis of Turkey. The transcript points out that Trump isn't just using rhetoric. He's allegedly taking calculated actions to signal a break from Netanyahu's influence.
And what's the primary example they give?
A high-profile diplomatic snub. The text claims Trump deliberately marginalized Netanyahu during a recent visit to Washington, D.C., essentially reminding the Israeli prime minister who the boss is.
While simultaneously pivoting to embrace Turkey's President Erdogan. To understand why a pivot to Turkey is so significant, we have to look at the mechanics of the region. The source reminds us that Turkey possesses the largest conventional military force in Europe, second only to the U.S. within NATO, and has historically been a massive strategic anchor for American power projection.
But the relationship has been incredibly rocky.
Yeah, mainly due to weapons procurement. The text details this complex, high-stakes negotiation where Turkey is supposedly attempting to offload its Russian-made S-400 air defense systems in order to secure access to American F-35 stealth fighter jets.
And the mechanics of that weapons deal are crucial here. For years, the U.S. refused to sell F-35s to Turkey while they possessed the Russian S-400s.
Because the fear was the advanced Russian radar would map the classified stealth profile of the F-35 and transmit that data back to Moscow.
Right, so by offering to sell the Russian systems now, Turkey is signaling a massive strategic realignment back toward Washington.
And according to the text, how does Israel react to this potential U.S.-Turkey rapprochement?
The source claims the reaction is immediate paranoia. It alleges that Israeli officials have openly declared they must accelerate preparations for a potential war with Turkey.
A war with Turkey.
Yeah.
Just because they bought some planes.
Well, the transcript interprets this as megalomaniacal, fundamentally unstable behavior. The argument is that Israel's current leadership is incapable of existing peacefully alongside any successful, heavily armed neighbor.
They just can't tolerate a peer.
Right. They view any concentration of regional power as an inherent existential threat, regardless of whether that neighbor is actually demonstrating hostile intent toward Tel Aviv.
So the narrative suggests a state that requires a permanent external enemy to justify its internal security state and maintain the coalition's grip on power.
Yes.
And this aggressive international maneuvering is having a profound destabilizing effect on the domestic political landscape in America. I mean, the transcript dedicates significant time to discussing a potential foundational fracture within the Republican Party.
It does. The source material presents a really harsh critique of the established GOP machinery. It argues that the traditional Republican establishment operates as what the text explicitly calls an Israel-first foreign occupational party.
That's quite a label.
It is. The framework asserts that for this establishment wing, foreign policy priorities and massive military aid packages dictated by Israeli interests completely supersede domestic American concerns or constitutional constraints.
And the text predicts a breaking point here.
Oh.
It argues that if this establishment machinery continues to forcefully suppress and marginalize the growing populist anti-war voices within the party, a massive schism is inevitable.
They name specific figures, too.
Yeah, the source lists figures like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, and Tulsi Gabbard, suggesting they are being pushed to the brink where they might break away entirely to form a viable third party.
The text dubs this hypothetical coalition an America First anti-war dream team.
Which is wild, because there is a fascinating, almost tragic irony presented here. Donald Trump, whose entire political identity and brand are built on the populist slogan of America First, is portrayed by the source as a man caught in a web.
Yeah, constrained by his own party.
Exactly. His own party's establishment is depicted as being so deeply tethered to foreign lobbying interests and military-industrial synchronization that it is forcing his most ardent populist supporters to consider literally blowing up the two-party system just to escape the relentless cycle of foreign wars.
If we synthesize this domestic political fracturing with the broader historical theories mentioned in the text, it adds a final, really compelling layer of context.
What's that?
The transcript references a theory discussed by Elon Musk at the World Government Summit. The theory posits that empires reaching the very end of their historical life cycles inevitably rely on foreign conflicts as a mechanism to maintain domestic control.
And to obscure the underlying systemic collapse of their society.
Right.
It's the classic wartime economy model. Like, if the citizens are focused on an existential enemy abroad, they won't notice the currency collapsing at home.
Right. And within the worldview of this source material, the potential formation of this third party isn't just viewed as standard political maneuvering or typical election year infighting.
Bigger than that.
Much bigger. It is framed as a desperate final attempt by a populist faction to violently break this historical cycle. They see the entrenched two-party system as fundamentally locked into a trajectory of perpetual global conflict and defense industry profits.
A machine that can't be turned off from the inside.
Exactly. They believe that unless this wartime economy model is shattered by a radical political disruption, the combination of massive unpayable national debt, demographic stagnation, and constant nuclear brinkmanship will inevitably lead to the total ruin of the United States.
Wow. We have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground today.
We really have.
I mean, we started by examining a seemingly localized intelligence rumor regarding an Iranian assassination plot against Donald Trump.
That feels like a lifetime ago.
It does. And from there, we traced the source's logic through claims of elaborate false flag operations designed to trigger a new 9/11. We explored the deep bureaucratic mechanics of Section 224 and how structural intelligence mergers theoretically bypass congressional oversight.
The lifetime synchronicity.
Right. We looked at the terrifying historical precedents of the 1974 nuclear blackmail incident and analyzed the psychology of apocalyptic hardliners operating without the safety net of mutually assured destruction. And finally, we examined how all of this international tension is allegedly driving the total fracturing of the U.S. political system.
It is a dense, sprawling, deeply unsettling, and undeniably controversial narrative from top to bottom.
And this is exactly why we do these deep dives. I want to remind you, the listener, of the immense value of examining these types of sources, even, or perhaps especially, when they contain explosive, uncomfortable, or highly polarizing claims.
It's crucial.
It is. By unpackaging this transcript impartially, step by step, we aren't adopting the viewpoints. But we are gaining a crucial, detailed understanding of the complex narratives, the underlying mechanical logic, and the profound societal anxieties that are actively shaping alternative political discourse today. You simply cannot understand the currents driving the modern political climate if you refuse to look at the maps millions of people are using to navigate it.
That is the core of critical thinking. Understanding the architecture of an argument is entirely separate from agreeing with it, but it is an essential skill in an era of information warfare.
Very true.
To leave you with a final provocative thought built entirely on the logic of the source material we reviewed today. We spent a lot of time discussing the threshold of civil unrest.
The 60% rule.
Right. The text emphasized the macroeconomic model that when a population spends 60% of its income on basic energy and food, serious revolution becomes a mathematical certainty. So take a moment and look around at the global economy you operate in today. Consider the persistent domestic inflation rates, the fragility of the supply chains you rely on, and the steadily soaring costs at your local grocery store. The transcript focuses heavily on the price of fertilizer spiking if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, leading to a cascade of agricultural failure.
And then prices just go parabolic.
Exactly. So consider this.
Yeah.
How much are domestic inflation and the price of basic groceries quietly dictating the public's tolerance for these massive trillion-dollar overseas conflicts?
Oh, that's a great point.
We spend so much time worrying about the transfer of nuclear codes, shadowy intelligence mergers, and the whims of cornered authoritarians, but according to the cold mathematical logic embedded in this text, could the ultimate unavoidable trigger for a total geopolitical and domestic collapse simply be the price of a bag of fertilizer?
Man, it brings it all back to that diagnostic X-ray we talked about at the very beginning. We keep looking for the clean, precise lines of traditional diplomacy, treaties, and military strategy to explain how the world works. But maybe the real diagnostic tool we need to be looking at isn't a satellite image of a military base or a transcript of a classified hearing.
What is it then?
Maybe it's the receipt from your local grocery store. It shows exactly how vulnerable the entire system truly is.
It really does.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly complex, demanding journey today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.